Well, good evening, Brennan. I extend to you a very warm welcome to this presentation number 5 in this second series of the Grand Lodge of Scotland's History and Heritage Group's presentations on the histories of our oldest lodges. And Brennan, at this early stage, can I ask you please remain muted, if you will, please. Brennan, it's my great pleasure to welcome Brother Alex Craib, past master of No.6, who very shortly will deliver his presentation on the history of the old Inverness Kilwinning St John's No.6. And we look forward to that, Alex. In the meantime, if I may, I'd now like to offer a very special welcome to our Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, who has joined us again this evening, and we thank him for his unstinting support throughout Series 1 and again throughout this Series 2. We very much appreciate his time and effort and his attendance and support. Thank you, sir. A very quick introduction, Brian, of the other members of the History and Heritage Group who are with us this evening. Brother Tom Jessup, Brother Charles Winston, Brother Alistair Henderson, Brother Douglas, Dr. Douglas Nichol, Brother Gordon Meekie, and Brother Colin Arthur. Our other member, Brother Nichol Scobie, is on other Masonic duty this evening and can't be with us. Well, as always, this presentation will be recorded. Gives you an opportunity to watch it again, or perhaps advise others who couldn't make it along this evening that it's there to be seen. Well, following the presentation, we will have a question and answering session. And if you do have any questions throughout the process of the presentation, would you please log them in the chat box, and our Brother Secretary, Charles Winston, will deal with those at the appropriate stage. And I would now like to invite our Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, sir, if you'd be good enough to introduce and say a few words about our speaker this evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, John. Well, good evening, brethren, and a very, very warm welcome to this, the 10th lecture in the History and Heritage Group series. Well, tonight it's a real pleasure, a real personal pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, as he has been a constant travelling companion of mine over many years to lodges the length and breadth of Scotland. And how good it is to have company on a Saturday night, believe you me, when driving back north from the south. But tonight he is taking on a somewhat different role by presenting what I am sure you will find to be a very interesting and fascinating look at the oldest lodge in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Alex Craib, Commander of the Venerable Order of St John, was initiated into Lodge Old Inverness Kilwinning St John's No.6 in October 1996. He was Master of the Lodge from 2010 to 2012, and again he was in the chair from 2016 to 2018. He's currently a commissioned Provincial Grand Lodge office bearer, one of 2 Provincial Grand Chaplains in the province of Inverness-shire, and he also represents the province on the Board of Grand Stewards in Grand Lodge. Alec is a native Dingwallian, better known locally as a Gudgecoff, and he recently returned to his roots, where he affiliated to Lodge Fingal and also to Lodge Alan Wilson here in Fortress, both lodges within the province of Ross and Cromarty. Alex, an honorary member of Lodge Priory in the province of Inverness-shire, and currently the proxy senior warden in Lodge Kirkwood Kilwinning in the eastern province of the Cape of Good Hope. So I would ask you all to give a very warm welcome to Alec as he gives us the history of the oldest lodge in the Highlands. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, for that fine introduction of Brother Alex Craib, and we'll look forward very much to his talk and his presentation this evening. I did ask him earlier if he would be speaking in English or in Gaelic. Brethren, I'll leave that up to you to decide. He's smiling, so he's got over his nerves. Well, my great pleasure now to introduce Brother Alex Craib to give his presentation on the history of old Inverness Kilwinning St John's No.6. Over to you, Alex.
First of all, take the opportunity to thank, on behalf of the office bearers and brethren of the Lodge, the History and Heritage Group for giving me the opportunity to present the short history of my mother lodge, a lodge which I'm immensely proud to be a member of, and which I've had the honour of being the master on 2 occasions. May I also thank the most worshipful Grand Master Mason for his very kind and much appreciated words of introduction. My congratulations also to the brethren who have enlightened us over the summer with the histories of their ancient and historic lodges. I am indebted to Brother Alexander Ross, a famous architect from the Highlands, who designed Inverness Cathedral, as well as many other beautiful buildings in the Highlands and beyond, who was a provost of Inverness, as well as a master of the lodge from 1873 to 1876, and Brother Walter P. Cameron, Justice of the Peace, a past provincial Grand Master of the province of Inverness-shire, from whom I sourced some of the following paper. As the lodge approaches its 350th year of an extremely important event, the receipt of a charter confirming its existence and authority from the Mother Lodge of Kilwinning, it is appropriate that a new history of the lodge is prepared, and I am honoured to have had the opportunity to do so. There is little doubt that the lodge was in existence long before 1678. It is probable, according to our records, that the lodge was formed between 1555 and 1560, if not before. It is written that Dr. John Dee, an astronomer and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, visited the lodge in the mid-16th century. Our tracing boards, which are not used in our ritual, but covered in other lectures in each degree, are believed to have been painted in the early 1600s. These hang in our lodge room, which is shared with the 3 other lodges in Inverness. Past Master Ross, in his research, noted that 1678 was the earliest date that records could be found, but wrote that an explanation of this was presented to the Grand Lodge of Scotland on St. Andrew's Day, 30th November, 1737, in the application to be chartered. The document stated that previous to 1678, the lodge kept their minutes from time to time in an irregular manner, upon sheets and baffles of paper, most of which now we cannot collect so as to make any of them to purpose. In 1678, a minute book was presented to the lodge by the Honourable William Mackintosh, the Right Worshipful Master, brother of the Laird of Mackintosh, into which all regular meetings and transactions were recorded. Sadly, that minute book subsequently went missing, possibly as a consequence of the Jacobite rebellion in the 1740s, when other lodge artefacts were removed or damaged, but more of that later. Although we are told that there is no mention of it in the minutes of Mother Kilwinning, our records show that the Old Inverness Lodge was granted a charter by Mother Kilwinning on the 30th of November 1678, which was read out at a meeting of the lodge on St. John's Night, the 27th of December that year. The charter hangs in our lodge room, along with the Charter of Constitution granted by the recently formed Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1737. The rights and privileges of the trades of Inverness were established by the Golden Charter granted to Inverness by King James VI on the 1st of January 1592. But at that time, the new year in Scotland did not start until the 25th of March, so it was actually 1591. The magistrates had a considerable measure of control over the trades, and so the Masons remained independent, but cooperated closely with the trades and owned a share in the trades house. The relationship between the magistrates, guilds, i.e. the merchants, and crafts continued with some friction until, after several attempts at improvement, a decreet arbitral, known today as a decree arbitral, entered into by these groups in 1676, established a more stable relationship in which the Masons played no part. A decree arbitral was a law to allow for grievances to be settled by an arbiter. Some sources say appointed by the Crown, whilst others say chosen by the parties. Historians have paid too little attention to the loss suffered in Scotland in many ways after King James VI left for London in 1603 and his personal concern for numerous facets of Scottish life abruptly ceased. Before 1603, Scottish Masons had the support and control of officials appointed by the Crown, and the relationship between a Mason and his lodge, and between lodges and the King's officials, resembled very closely the structure of an old Scottish bond of manrent. The old, well-established lodges, Old Inverness among them, continued to meet and act, to control hours of work, to test and receive apprentices, and otherwise to maintain and protect their craft. It was during this period that they granted membership to people of consequence who were attracted by their teaching and who might give them assistance and even protection. And by 1678, Old Inverness numbered among its members some who were known as geometrical brethren, one of whom, William Mackintosh, brother of the Laird of Mackintosh, was the master of the lodge. In the previous year, 1677, another of the old lodges, Canongate Kilwinning, had accepted a charter from the Lodge of Kilwinning, which they confirmed in a letter sent to the Mother Lodge on February the 16th, 1737, after the founding of Grand Lodge. Canongate Kilwinning and Old Inverness were the only lodges to receive a Kilwinning charter in the 17th century. The Decreet Arbitrum of 1676 strengthened and clarified the position of the trades in Inverness, and may well have induced Old Inverness to seek a confirmation of its own status within the Mother Lodge tradition. The Church, up until the late 17th century, had been a great supporter of Freemasonry, but begun to discourage secret societies, and the lodges seem to have merged into guilds and incorporated trades. Around 1727, however, an upsurge in Freemasonry began, and Scotland was regarded across Europe as the cradle and nursery of Freemasonry, from where it rapidly spread across the globe. It became what was then termed speculative Freemasonry, and men other than craftsmen were admitted into the secrets. This, of course, had been common in Inverness in the form of operative and geometric brethren. These geometric brethren were local gentry and business people, not operative Masons. Despite its enrolment of geometrical brethren, Old Inverness was still primarily an operative lodge in 1678, and the importance of this operative element persisted for another 100 years. How important it continued to be is shown by a minute entry for November the 1st, 1752. The master represented to the meeting that he would have observed the quarterly meetings, which are now elapsed since the 25th of March last, but that all or most of the operative brethren were either working in the country or employed in the public works at the point of Inverness-shire, which we now know as Fort George. And for that reason, he thought it unnecessary to convene the few geometrical brethren who live in the borough, as no business could be concerted or settled in the absence of the operative brethren, and more particularly, that he thought it a hardship-straightening season, which called aloud for the utmost diligence. The Old Kilwinning Lodge continued to be the Mother Lodge until 1736, when at an assembly in Edinburgh on St Andrew's Day, 30th November, to elect a Grand Master Mason, Lord Roslin resigned the office of Hereditary Grand Master of Mother Kilwinning when the Grand Lodge of Scotland was formed, and was promptly re-elected as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Alexander Ross reported that there were 34 Scottish lodges present that day, including the Old Inverness Lodge, which was represented by James Dean, the Right Worshipful Master, Dr. Thomas Horton and John Crawford, the wardens, as proxy representatives of the lodge. The application to the Grand Lodge of Scotland for a charter by the lodge was dated the 30th of November, 1737, and was granted that day, St Andrew's Day, by Grand Lodge to Old Kilwinning St John number 9, according to Drappin's records. But according to Lodge records, the first number was number 8. So we know that Drappin didn't always get things right. He had Lodge Portru's 108 shown as being in Harris and not Lewis. It was interesting to hear Brother Magnus Burgess, past master, Lodge Canongate and Leith and Canongate number 5, point out that last week's presentation that they too were numbered 8. I think further research on that point on my part is required. On that day, George, the Earl of Cromarty and Viscount of Tarbet, had been elected to the office of Grand Master Mason. At a meeting of the Lodge on the 22nd of December 1737, the charter from the Grand Lodge of Scotland was read for the first time. Around 1735, some of the geometrical brethren from the Lodge formed a new lodge, known as New Inverness, until the name Lodge St. Andrew was decided upon. And their charter, number 31, was issued by Grand Lodge on the same day as the Old Inverness Lodge. The purpose of the new lodge was to assist in entertaining important visitors to the Old Inverness Lodge. The two lodges retained a close affinity though. Old Inverness continued to attract geometrical brethren and welcomed distinguished visitors to the lodge, including Alexander Drummond, Provincial Grand Master of Scotland, in 1739, and General Sir Adolphus Oughton, Commander of the King's Forces and Grand Master Mason, in 1770, who had been visiting Fort George to inspect the troops there, and whom St. Andrew's number 31 assisted in entertaining. In 1740, the Old Inverness Lodge purchased a mort cloth, a cloth used to cover the coffin, and a man's social standing was gauged by the possession of it at appropriate burials. The Lodge wished to have it in our power to see indigent brethren decently and honourably interred. In true Scottish fashion, though, a charge was made for its use. It was the duty of the tiler to carry the mort cloth to the funeral service of the brethren, and for this he would pay 1 shilling for loss of earnings incurred. The Jacobite Rebellion of 1745-46 had a huge effect on society in the Highlands, understandably, and Freemasonry was no exception. It is clear that some clans, including the Macintoshes, sided with Bonnie Prince Charlie, whilst others were loyal to the king. In 1746, the house in Church Street, wherein the lodge room was situated, was taken over by the Duke of Cumberland and his forces. The house was built on land gifted to the Incorporated Trades and Masons by the Dowager Lady Dermure about 1772. The story goes that as Bonnie Prince Charlie, son of the exiled King James VII, born on the 31st of December 1720, had slept in the house prior to the Battle of Culloden, the Duke, third and youngest son of King George II, sent her to prison for the duration of his occupancy. She was quoted as saying that she had had 2 King's bairns living under her roof and didn't want to see another one. The St. Andrew's Lodge room was used as a guard room by the elderly sergeant, and the disruption to lodge workings was such that there had not been a meeting of the lodge between St. John's Day in 1745 until St. John's Day in 1747. It was recorded that at this meeting, the members of the lodge inquired of the treasurer for the charter, records, jewels, utensils, and cash. His response was that during the time of the Duke of Cumberland's occupancy, all the particulars mentioned were destroyed or carried off, except for the charter which he had saved by accident, and which he laid before the lodge. The lodge, considering this loss with concern, and as a calamity which they could not remedy, proceeded to elect the office bearers for the following year, although the treasurer came under some suspicion. Nothing, however, was proven. Evan Bailey of Dochborough was elected master for the ensuing year. Brother Bailey was a predecessor of Michael Bailey, the Right Worshipful Master of Lodge Old Inverness Kilwinning St. John's No. 6 during the tercentenary in 1978, and a past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, better known as the Right Honourable Lord Burton, a man who the Lodge is immensely proud of. Another predecessor of Lord Burton's was John Bailey, who had represented the Lodge at the Grand Lodge of Scotland between 1739 and 1747, when he became the first Provincial Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Inverness-shire, an office he held until being replaced in 1756. In addition to the loss of Lodge St. Andrew's artefacts, Lodge Old Kilwinning St. John's suffered heavy losses too. Most of the jewels made of silver disappeared at that time, except for the immediate past master's jewel, which is hallmarked 1731, and which I proudly wear at present. The rest of the Lodge jewels date from 1810, except for 2, which have subsequently been replaced for different reasons. The second degree tracing board was also damaged and later repaired, believed to have been around 1863. When the sun was repaired, the letter G was added to the equilateral triangle, and the board was repainted. The Right Worshipful Master's jewel was replaced about 1810 by a local craftsman who produced the square and compasses. It is unusual in that in place of the sun and the splendor, this jewel carries an inset past master's jewel made in gold. It seems to be the first past master's jewel given by the lodge and must rank among the oldest of such jewels to have survived. The jewel is inscribed on the obverse with the words, "Our trust is in the Lord," and "Sit lux et lux fuit," let there be light, and there was light. On the reverse, the inscription reads, "Gift of Old Inverness No. 8 to Brother John Grigger for services being 9 years master, 1774. The jewel was made by Brother Robert Anderson, past master, and cost £2, 19 shillings and 1 penny, around about £2.96. Attached to the jewel by a small gold ring, on which is inscribed "Honour et amiciata amor," honour, friendship and love, is a gold tag on which is inscribed, "This emblem belonged to my mother, Frances Horsbury of Yorkshire, England, when a girl in 1830, and placed with Earl Jersey to hand back to the Old Lodge by J. Horbury Hunt, Sydney, New South Wales, 1893. On the 29th of September, 1746, a second petition was prepared for a loft or balcony to be erected in the Highland Kirk, following a previous application made in 1728. The petition was read out in the presence of the Kirk session. The petition reading that the Masons had no place in either of the churches of the borough for accommodating them to hear the word of God. The Kirk session, having heard this submission, made a site visit to the nominated church. After much discussion, permission was granted under several conditions. The lodge had imposed a tax on each member of 1 penny per week from the 9th of February until Christmas Day to purchase materials for the loft for themselves and their families, and that they would have no privilege or seat in the church unless they had paid £4 Scots each. It appears that this was not too popular with the brethren of the lodge, as several pleas to pay their dues had to be made, and the idea was not heard again for 3.5 years. The lodge had purchased the wood for the erection of the balcony, but it had lain for that time and was in very poor condition. It was agreed to sell the materials, and these realised the princely sum of £7, 18 shillings and threepence, which the boxmaster eventually received for lodge funds. From 1745 until 1815, the Old Lodge had a great many distinguished visitors who were entertained by the St. Andrew's Lodge, which relieved the Old Lodge of social responsibilities that may have proved a burden, and which maintained a close relationship between the lodges. During this period, many firing glasses were purchased, which are still in the lodge's possession today. These were being used at the lodge's harmonies, which were usually conducted by the sister lodge. The visitations of distinguished brethren, all gentlemen of substance, demanded that better accommodation was required. A Lodge St. Andrew minute dated 28th of December 1767 stated that the idea of building a lodge for their mutual accommodation was discussed when a St. Andrew's deputation visited the Old Inverness Lodge. The Old Inverness minute of the same evening stated that the sister lodge proposed to have a lodge erected and built for the accommodation of both bodies, and that the sister lodge would apply to their utmost for contributions to gentlemen who might occasionally be in the place. Each lodge would fund a substantial sum, and the contributions would augment the building costs. Several sites were considered in the centre of Inverness, and finally the site of Church Street was purchased in 1775 for £200 Scots. By 1776, the subscriptions had fallen well below the expected and required level, so St. Andrews applied most firmly to the Old Lodge to sell their property immediately to allow the construction of the new building. The Old Inverness Lodge owned a 7th share in the Trades House, the other 6 shares being held by the 6 incorporated trades. There was clearly some reluctance among the brethren of the lodge to sell their shares and to sever their association with incorporated trades. And it wasn't until May the 2nd, 1780, that they recorded the sale of their 1/7 share to the 6 incorporated trades. Incorporated trades owned several properties in the centre of Inverness which yielded good revenue, and it appears that the Old Lodge had benefited from this prior to the sale of their share in the trades. The new premises were finally built and completed on June the 5th, 1780 at an estimated cost of around £1,800 and initially known as the Caledonian Inn, later changed to the Caledonian Hotel. Sadly, by February 1785, the lodges were in debt to the sum of £730. It was such that any income that could be raised from the inn would not cover its outgoings, so it was agreed that they must reduce the debts or risk losing the inn. The annual burden was £48 and 10 shillings, and the best rent that they could secure was £50. Subsequently, it was agreed that they must increase the fees, advertise the inn in Edinburgh newspapers, and grant annuities. These transactions raised concerns among the operative brethren. For some years, the lodge had struggled to secure acceptance of its authority over the operative masons, and this became even more evident after the sale of Trades House. Although the operative connection had begun to lose its usefulness to operative tradesmen, the tradition of the old association remained. In 1795, several operative masons presented a petition to both lodges asking for a recommendation to form a new lodge, which was given. And the new lodge, Clachnacudden Operative number 259, was formed in 1796. The old lodge was asked for assistance to build a lodge room, but this was rejected due to the present debts being incurred by the lodge and the inn. The Clachnacudden Lodge was wound up in 1824, and this effectively marked the end of the old lodge as an operative lodge. On the 6th of May, 1799, the foundation stone of the Royal Northern Infirmary was laid by the 3 Masonic Lodges, led by the Old Lodge, and a formal procession was arranged through the streets of Inverness to the site of the hospital from the northern meeting rooms in Church Street, where the 3 reigning masters, assisted by the brethren, laid the stone, following which the lodges left to dine and enjoy an appropriate harmony for such an auspicious day. A meeting of the lodge was called for the 23rd of August 1799 to consider the Unlawful Societies Act, which had been passed by Parliament for the suppression of seditious societies, which potentially involved Masonic lodges. This followed a communication from the Grand Lodge of Scotland, which had met on the 5th of August of that year. It had been declared illegal for any body of men to require an oath, test, or declaration from their members not authorised by law, but an express exemption was contained therein in favour of Freemasons under certain conditions. The reigning master, Father MacDonald, reported to the lodge on the 30th of November that in consequence of the last minute, he had complied with the Act of Parliament, and now he wished to produce an extract of the proceedings. He asked that the proceedings be recorded and thereafter transmitted to Grand Lodge. He had made several declarations in the presence of Mr. James Grant, Justice of the Peace and Clerk for the County of Inverness. These included the title of the lodge, the Old Kilwinning Lodge of Inverness, number 8 of Scotland. Also, that the lodge met within the Masons' Lodge of Inverness on Ladies' Day, the 25th of March, St. John the Baptist Day, 24th of June, St. Andrew's Day, 30th of November, and St. John the Evangelist Day, 27th of December. As an aside, because the meetings were held quarterly, the dues became known as quarter pennies, a term we use to this day in the lodge. A letter from the Grand Lodge on the 18th of November 1801 intimated a division of districts for provincial Grand Masters and classed St. John's as number 9 instead of number 8, which caused much unrest in the lodge. After 1815, there was a sudden drop in the number of visitors to Inverness lodges, particularly to Lodge St. Andrew. The new lodge had maintained its special relationship with the old lodge during its existence, its members concerning themselves with the social and benevolent aspects of Freemasonry, leaving the old lodge to work as an operative lodge and to act as a senior and Inverness authority in Freemasonry. Lodge St Andrew welcomed as visitors and initiates members of many notable Highland families, the Baileys, the Macintoshes and the Fraser, including the chiefs of these families, and many others of like status from the wider Highlands. Leading Inverness residents in its membership included Governor Caulfield, who had succeeded General George Wade as Her Majesty's Inspector of Roads in 1732, and who had continued Wade's programme of building roads and bridges across the Highlands. Joseph Mitchell, a noted civil engineer who had been apprenticed to Thomas Telford during the construction of the Caledonian Canal, and local provost Thomas Gilzine. In 1816, the old lodge was renamed Old Inverness Kilwinning St John's and renumbered as No. 6, although the lodge has traditionally used the Roman numerals VI, although at this time the reason for this is unclear. The year 1837 proved itself to be a watershed for Freemasonry in Inverness, with a recently formed lodge, Union Lodge number 350, folding. This lodge had been formed in 1819 to address the great apathy and neglect which the lodges already established have evinced. The first meeting set out the objectives of preserving and perpetuating the solemn mysteries of the Sacred Order of Freemasonry, to establish a fund to help distressed brethren, to petition for a charter, to borrow money for jewels and other paraphernalia for a lodge to be called Union Lodge, and to elect office bearers. It appears that this lodge did not have a happy or successful existence, having been threatened with being struck off the roll by the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1830 unless they settled their arrears. The lodge regalia and artefacts were passed on to Lodge St Mary's Caledonian Operative number 339, apart from the lodge seal, which remains in the possession of Lodge St John's and is in fact in the museum at the Grand Lodge of Scotland at present. That same year, 1837, Lodge St Andrew number 31, having had no candidates since 1815, formally united with the old lodge again. There was still the problem of the overcapitalised and debt-ridden hotel, and in 1845 the titles of the property were vested in the newly formed trustees of the St John's Kilwinning Lodge of Freemasons, Inverness, No. 6 of Scotland's Friendly Society. The hotel had been altered and extended several times during its existence, including the addition of a dedicated lodge room, adding to the debt. Finally, in 1912, the debt had increased so much that the building was sold, although the arrangement was made that as long as the hotel stood, the lodge had a meeting room. The beautiful hotel was demolished in the mid-60s, ending this arrangement, and the lodge moved from their long-time home further down Church Street to School Lane into the lodge room at Trade's House, sharing with another two lodges, both of whom had been consecrated earlier, one in August 1843 and the other in May 1949, both of whom are still in existence. On the 25th of March 1964, a new company, Masonic Properties Inverness Limited, was formed and incorporated with the aim of providing suitable surroundings for the continuation of Freemasonry in Inverness. This company was formed by the 4 lodges now operating in the town. The present Masonic Club, hitherto a family home, was purchased and converted into a social club, but more importantly, a temporary Masonic temple, and was used by 3 of the lodges until the construction of the new Masonic temple was completed, and the temple was consecrated by the Grand Lodge of Scotland, led by Brother Captain Robert Wheelers Gordon of Esselman, the Grand Master Mason, on the 24th of April 1976. 2 years later, in 1978, Grand Lodge were back in the temple to rededicate Lodge Old Inverness Kilwinning St John's No. 6 on the roll of the Grand Lodge of Scotland on the occasion of the Lodge tercentenary. The Right Worshipful Master on that day was the Right Honourable Lord Burden, later to become the Grand Master Mason of Scotland. The Lodge has, in common with other lodges, endured downs and enjoyed ups, but is still as strong as ever. We've had a string of candidates over recent years, and have candidates to initiate on a return to open meetings, hopefully soon. In summary, during its pre-1678 rule until 1763, Old Inverness was a strong operative lodge, which at an early date attracted the interest and support of many geometrical brethren because of the intellectual and moral appeal of its teaching. The lodge was closely in touch with national development, as is showed by their early acceptance of the Kilwinning Charter, and in 1736 by their active participation in the formation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. The formation of Lodge St Andrews Kilwinning No. 31 helped them to continue their work as an operative lodge until it became unnecessary in 1780, and to play their part in the tremendous flowering of Scottish Freemasonry during the 18th and 19th centuries. After 1780, they maintained and developed a tradition of Freemasonry in their lodge that was based on a dignified and more sincere working, generous benevolence, and a spirit of corporate harmonious relationship. This, brethren, completes my history of Lodge Old Inverness, Kilwinning St George No. 6, and I trust that I provided an enlightening insight to the history of our ancient lodge. And thank you once again for the opportunity of presenting this history. The more I researched, the more I was fascinated and interested. My research will not stop here. I intend to delve some more. I also take the opportunity to thank those who have provided support to me during my endeavours, especially the photographers, and the PowerPoint wizard who was asked to remain anonymous. Thanks again, brethren.
Well, Alex, may I, on behalf of the brethren assembled, congratulate you on an excellent presentation, really well researched and very detailed and very enjoyable. Well done, Alex. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
During the course of your presentation, I know that there was one or two questions that have been posted in the chat box, and I would now invite Brother Charles Winson, if you will, sir, just advise us of those questions for Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we start with a question from the Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason? Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason, would you like to ask your question?
You're perfectly capable of reading it, Charles. Just you go for it.
Very good, sir. The question is, Robert Burns was initiated in 1781, and 6 years later in 1787, he travelled to Inverness and stayed in the Eccles Hotel in Bridge Street, which was literally round the corner from the lodge. Was he one of the distinguished visitors to the lodge in 1787?
We are very aware that Robert Burns visited Inverness, and indeed he stayed in the Eccles Hotel in Bridge Street, which has been replaced now by an ugly concrete box. This building, this hotel, which is round the corner from the lodge room, sadly, for various reasons. One is the fact that some of our records are missing, and the existing records are now in the Archive Centre in Inverness, which has clearly been under lockdown for the last few months. It is again open, but on restricted, very restricted terms. So that's something that we're looking to answer ourselves. But sadly, at this time, I couldn't honestly say if he attended the lodge. I would like to think that he did, but I couldn't honestly say that he did attend the lodge.
We have a question from Fraser Mackenzie with regard to the damage to the tracing boards. Do we know what actually caused it, and is it recorded anywhere?
The tracing boards, the second degree tracing board was damaged at the time of the rebellion, about 1746, just after the Battle of Culloden. Subsequently, it was repaired round about 1863, and it was also the sun was repaired. There, the letter G was added to into the equilateral triangle, and the board was repainted. History tells us that it was either a bayonet or a musket shot that damaged it, but sadly, with no way of proving that what caused the damage. we know it was damaged, but sadly we don't know exactly what caused the damage.
And a question from Brother Alexander Moncrief: is the term geometrical brethren for non-operative masons exclusive to Old Inverness number 6, or is it used elsewhere?
I'm quite sure it's used elsewhere. It wouldn't be a term in particular to the lodge, the Old Inverness Lodge. We had both. We had operative masons and the geometrical masons were brethren other than operative masons. So I'm quite sure that would have been a term used out with Inverness.
Are these brethren recorded in the minutes as being geometrical members?
They were. In the minute book that we have, sadly the first one, as I said, has gone missing, but we have one from 1737, which is in the Archive Centre, and they're recorded in there as being geometrical brethren on their initiation.
A question perhaps not so much directed at you, Alec, as to whether or not the office of Grand Harpist might ever be resurrected.
We have a set of Jew's harp in our as part of our artifacts, and that was presented by the Grand Harpist, I think in 17 or 1896, if I remember.
Could I ask you, Alec, are there any, obviously the lodge was involved in the building of Fort George. Do you know what year that began?
That was the construction of that was after the rebellion, and the operative masons in the lodge were employed at Fort George in the construction of the garrison there, and that took several years to complete.
Do you know if there are any masons' marks in the fort?
I'm not sure if there are masons' marks. I would be very surprised if there aren't, because there are other, the Caledonia Canal, for instance. I've recently had occasion to be on the very floor of the canal, which of the locks, and there are masons' marks all along the Caledonia Canal in the locks. So I'm quite sure there will be in Fort George, but I can't honestly say I've seen any.
Could I ask you, has Highland dress or played a part in the lodge as a form of dress, or today or in the past?
The two occasions every year that the lodge gets dressed up, when I say dressed up, I mean an evening dress or Highland dress. We don't get wear Highland dress for our installations, but we do for the Festival of St. John on the 27th of December, and also for our provincial visit on the third Saturday in March.
And is there a particular tartan associated with the lodge?
No, no particular tartan.
A question from Brother Ian McIntosh. Interesting to note that visitors to the lodge, one of the visitors to the lodge was Alexander Drummond in April of 1739. You mentioned he was styled as the Provincial Grand Master of Scotland, and he gave a lecture to the lodge. Is this the first mention of a Provincial Grand Master in Scotland?
Certainly the first mention of a Provincial Grand Master in our records, but I couldn't honestly say about the rest of Scotland.
And a question from Ian Walsh. I noticed that one of the tracing boards, the letter associated with a keystone appear, but there are extra letters. Have you any comment to make on these?
I have completed an explanation of the tracing boards for another meeting that I've been involved in, but this evening, I'm afraid my concentration was directed on this presentation, so I couldn't honestly say. But it's certainly something I can come back with very, very quickly.
From Ken Wallace, interesting to see Sit Lux et Lux Fruit, which is also in the lodge room at the Lodge of Edinburgh. Is it known if this phrase is used in any other Scottish lodges?
Again, I'm not sure about other Scottish lodges. It's certainly on our Right Worshipful Master Jewel. And it's the inset to a past master jewel. I don't know if everyone noticed on the photo of the jewel that the centre is the centrepiece of a past master jewel. Indeed, it was the first past master jewel issued by the lodge.
And a question from Danny Morrison, Brother Danny Morrison. Are there any brethren known to have participated in the rebellion of 1745-46 on either side or acted as collaborators?
Absolutely, it was understandable that there would be supporters of both sides in the lodge, and the Macintoshes, scoundrels that they were, the Laird of Macintosh, who was the brother of William, the present master at that time, fought for Bonnie Prince Charlie.
I have a comment from Brother Saul Bruce. As far as I have seen, there are no Masonic marks at Fort George, not since the lodge moved from the barracks into Ardesseer.
Brother Bruce is a member of our lodge and is stationed at Fort George, so quite sure he'll be aware of that.
And Brother Paul Ledbetter comments that Sit Lux, etc., is on a carpet in a lodge in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire. So it's obviously being used elsewhere.
I would think the translation, the English translation from the Latin is "let there be light," and there was light. I think that's particular relevance to the degrees, or certainly one of them.
And final comment from Brother Ian McIntosh. He was brother. Well, the comment is he was the brother of George Drummond, Lord Provost of Edinburgh.
Brother Drummond, who was the first provincial Grand Master.
Could you expand a little bit? You made a comment that you used the term quarter pennies.
The lodge met 4 times a year in the 1700s, so the lodge dues were known as quarter pennies, and to this day we call our lodge dues quarter pence.
And Mr. Chairman, that's all the questions I have in the waiting room.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Can I just add one comment? I don't know if it helps clarify or not. Alexander Drummond is the first provincial Grand Master of Scotland. I seem to recall having read something about Alexander Drummond being the first provincial Grand Master, but I think it was termed the Western Counties, which included Glasgow, Renfrewshire, Ayrshire, Dumbartonshire, and Inverness. So Western Counties to include Inverness, perhaps a sense of geography wasn't all that clever all those years ago. But I think it was the first provincial Grand Master, not necessarily for Scotland, but the first in Scotland. That's my understanding, and I'm sure Alec will go and prove me wrong. But can I offer my thanks to all of those who asked questions of Alex, who answered them extremely well, as we would have expected. So thank you for those questions, and thank you, Alex, for the manner in which you dealt with them all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add a couple of things there? Alexander Drummond had quite a kind of colourful career. He did actually go out to the Middle East, and he was given an additional title which involved the lodges out in Syria and so on. And he did actually produce a book about his travels in the Mediterranean. He was involved with customs and excise. Not a great deal is actually known about him. He seemed to come back to Scotland, and kind of his career was, I think, swept under the carpet a wee bit. I don't know whether there was some kind of scandal or whatever, but he was the brother of George Drummond, who was the designer, who was responsible for the new town of Edinburgh being built, and he's of course Grand Master Mason of Scotland as well. So an interesting character, Alexander Drummond.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alistair, thank you for that additional clarification there on Brother Drummond. Thank you. Brethren, again, my thanks to all who raised some questions, and my thanks to Alex for his dealing with them so well. And just before I invite Grand Master Mason, if he has any final remarks, at this stage I would normally talk about our next presentation. This presentation this evening is presentation number 5 in the second series, presentation number 10 overall. And the History and Heritage Group are meeting next week on the 15th of the month. And amongst our agenda items, we will have a discussion on future presentations. And we're looking at how we can improve upon it, what the alternatives are for our presentations, oldest lodges, perhaps including others as well. So we've got some thinking to do on that. We want to continue with these presentations with your support, of course, but we are meeting next week to discuss some alternative formats, shall we say. So there's quite a bit of work to do before we can confirm our next presentations, and those dates will be communicated at the earliest. So with that said, can I now invite Grand Master Mason, if you'd be good enough just to say a few final words.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, Alec, you've certainly merited the dram that you're going to have after the meeting. That was just first class. Well done. Many congratulations. You've put in a tremendous amount of research to that paper, and it brought the whole series to a very fitting conclusion. So thank you very much indeed. And could I, at this juncture, on behalf of all of the participants, and I think we've averaged over the last 5 meetings round about the 75, 78 attendees at each meeting, which I think is first class. Could I, on all of your behalf, thank John, Charles and the team for making all the arrangements, for setting up the presentations. I think I can speak for virtually everybody, John, when we say that we've thoroughly enjoyed all of them. They've been very, very interesting indeed. They've raised some absolutely unbelievable points at times, and it's all, you know, it's all given the opportunity for others to chip in, as we had tonight, with Alistair giving a wee bit of background about Drummond. And he probably sat in the same office as Tom Jessup sat a few years later. So we've got history on the move right through the generations. So it's been a tremendous project by the History and Heritage Group. And in behalf of everyone, can I thank you most sincerely for all of your efforts. And we look forward to whatever it is you're going to produce in the future. So thank you very much indeed. And again, thank you to Alec for an excellent presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason.
Thank you, Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason, for your very kind words on the works and efforts of the History and Heritage Group. I can assure you it's been a pleasure and privilege to have organised and overseen these 10 tremendous presentations on our oldest lodges, and we will continue. Format might be slightly different once we've had our discussion, but we will keep you fully advised of the revised format, if there is to be one, and dates accordingly. So we will deal with that over these next few weeks, and we will come up with something, even if it is to say we'll do exactly the same again, but we are looking to examine how we might improve things. Everything that we do to, we hope, a high standard. There's always room for improvement, and that's where we will be investigating. But we greatly appreciate the kind words you said, sir. Thank you. And now I think Charles is going to allow us just a wee bit more time than normal in terms of saying our cheerios to everybody. This will be our last meeting for quite a wee while until we get ourselves reorganised, new format, and some dates sent out to you. So, Charles, would you like to say something to conclude?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brethren, if you'd like to unmute yourselves, as this is the last in the current series, I'm going to give you a little bit longer than usual to say your goodbyes and make any comments. So if you'd like to unmute, it's over to you, brethren.
Thank you, Alec. That was a great talk. I certainly appreciated it.
Thank you.
Well done, Alec.
Well done, Alec.
Congratulations, Alec. Superb.
Well done, Alec.
Well done, Alec.
Well done, Alec. First class.
Cheers, Alec. Really good. Really enjoyed that.
Well done, Alec. You join after.
Brilliant.
Well done. Very good. Most enjoyable.
Enjoy your drum, Paul.
Excellent presentation. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you.
Alex, I knew you
Like
did
it's
well.
a great lecture.
Alec, thank you for your excellent presentation tonight, and I look forward to actually seeing you later on this evening for a wee dram for us toast up some brethren.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for
taking that long.
Alex.
Most excellent, Alec. It's more enlightening to my mother lodge, and the more information we get as we travel through the chairs and up the ladder, it's most enlightening, all the stuff that you've come up with. Some of it I've heard already, but there's a lot of the information that you gave there was something that I never thought of. Thank you very much.
Alec, it's Terry here. It was a wonderful presentation tonight, and our master at Kilwinning in the Jacobite Wars got his head chopped off at the Tower, and I'll probably say.
Well done, Alex. It's very difficult to come in at the very end of a series and produce something of superb quality. Well done, sir.
Yes, well done.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Josh.
So you had nothing to worry about, Alec.
Well done, Alex. It seems a long time ago since I kicked this off, but I've thoroughly enjoyed each and every one of these presentations. Well done to the History and Heritage Group, and I look forward to what you come up with in the future.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom.
Well done, Alec. See you to be well.
Hi, cheers, Tom.
Well done, Alec. Oh,
Thanks, Nobby.
no worries at all, was there?
Well done, Alec.
He brushes up well, doesn't he?
Excellent presentation. All the presentations I've seen, all the 10 history presentations, has been excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, Alex. I'll see you later, hopefully.
Cheers, Danny.
You can take your tie off for our one, Alec. We're not that formal.
You need to tie you up to let the drum go down.
I'm sure you'll manage that bit, no problem at all, Alec.
Thanks, David.
My question is, you can join us in the back, Alec. My
Your
question
dram's
is,
well deserved.
the brethren have got suits, ties and everything on. My question is it just the jacket, so you got the trousers on as well, or you got your jammies on the bottom?
I've got the kilt on.
Thank you, brethren. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Right. Speak to you later, brother Grip.
Again.
Enjoyable evening.
Good night.
See you tomorrow night, Alex.
I look forward to that.